Guess I'll start with a question on like not your tarot mediumship, but your background in painting. I kind of already told you I was going to ask you this, but just I didn't necessarily know this right away, or I've recently came upon like the idea that artists in general, like some people look at it as like channeling not themselves or like channeling something else in like the artwork that they do.
Well, there's been specific artworks that are even famous that are said to be like channeled from otherworldly intelligences or whatever, be it spiritual. I'm sure there's probably some UFO people too. I don't know. But there are paintings like that. And so with me, I wouldn't say I ever looked at painting for myself like that unless I have done that intentionally, actually. I have a painting of my dog that passed that was like definitely a channeled painting because it was sort of because I don't know what it is with her, but I'll just feel she'll just like visit every now and again energetically or something.
Yeah.
But I was just experimenting with abstract painting one time and she just came out with it and I don't know, I just flowed with it and ended up that way. So that painting feels like it's sort of a mediumship channeled thing. But what I will say is that my experience with painting is definitely intuitive. So I wouldn't say that I'm intentionally channeling things unless maybe a specific energy or archetype, maybe, but I will say that it sort of organically flows out of me. I mean, I'll have a concept in mind most of the times, but a lot of the way I'll start painting, especially with my large paintings, because you have one, I'll do like a 6 foot painting. And I'll usually start those. Now, the one you have, I was deliberate. I wanted to do that image. But a lot of the time, what I'll do is I'll just start painting abstractly until I sort of see an image start to form, and then I'll run with it. So it is kind of this organic and intuitive process. And I paint from my mind a lot more than I used to because I used to be really concerned with technical painting. And when I was really serious about painting, it's like, I've always loved abstract art, and I always loved figurative art. But I was like, I want people to know I know how to paint. Like I want to be able to paint well, and I want to be able to do, masterpieces, and still do. Um, but even like as an abstract painter that is purely intuitive at a lot. Well, I don't know. I guess there's a lot of controlled abstract, but I feel like an understanding of the foundations bring you a long way. On top of that, painting, I would say it is inherently channeled actually, because it is, an expression from your consciousness. It's an expression from a thought form, or but either way, it's the essence of creativity, which is the same thing as, that God spark and even like sexual energy and all that. It's an expression of that. And in an alchemical sense, even we're taking an idea and then we're taking these pigments that have been turned into mush and we're
Yeah.
creating it. Um, so, artwork and just creativity in general, be it painting or anything or just artful living, I definitely see as integrated into my spiritual process, but also that's just always that's who I've always been. I've just always drawn like it's like my place in this earth to do that. That's just like what I've always done and
Yeah.
always will in whatever context.
Yeah. And I was thinking about it because I don't know where I heard that like the concept of like channeling something else, but I heard it in just like ideas that I think it's the idea that like none of us are like we're all, which I've talked to you about before, like we're all part of something bigger and the all, which a lot of people say that like ideas come to you and they're not necessarily even your ideas. And like if you don't grab hold of it, like it will go on to someone else. But
That's an
that's,
interesting idea.
yeah, I
I've
don't,
heard that somewhere. I can't remember where I've heard that, but I know I've heard that.
yeah, which I do find interesting because I feel like I'll even see things where people like take onto a certain concept or idea and they do it. And I'm like, oh, I had that idea. And like, I'm
I've
like,
had that experience too.
yeah. And I'm like, it kind of makes sense where it explained, like, well, if you don't take the idea, it'll pass on to someone else. And like, they could take it and put it into action.
Well, I think that that has, I mean, that's an interesting idea, and it definitely sort of feeds into the idea of an egregore or just like a collective consciousness.
Yeah.
I don't know. Personally, I just have a hard time visualizing ideas as these little things that are like floating around, like, hey, let's check this guy out. Maybe it'll work for him, you know.
Yeah.
But I mean, it must be more complex than that because different kinds of people have different kinds of ideas, I feel like, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah. It
mm,
gets into like, where does anything come from? And very like hard
that's the
to
thing.
pin down thoughts of like creativity in general.
Well, here's what I will say.
Yeah.
Is, you know, if we're talking about the process of invocation, you know, when you're invoking like specific entities that hold specific energies assigned to them and archetypes and everything else, you know, the tendency is to start thinking and acting um, in that way.
Yeah. And I feel like that's something which I'm interested to hear like your perspective on, because I didn't necessarily ever think of it until like knowing you and working with you of like intentional invocation, but I think that's a practice of like everyone's life is like I am invoking a certain energy depending on what I'm doing. Um, but I'm not necessarily conscious of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I mean, that's a real thing. We are doing that all the time. Um, you know, I think in a lot of ways that would be considered like, you know, low magic or whatever.
Yeah.
Because that's really what it is. You know, you know, when I was a little kid, I invoked the spirit of Michael Jackson just because I thought he was cool shit. And I wanted like those jackets and all
Yeah.
that sort of thing. Um, and you know, when you are at work or if you're in a relationship, even one could, you know, get into having different ways that you relate with different people.
Yeah.
You know, so, and I think that in a lot of ways, that's what we're honestly doing with, conscious invocation, because even using, you know, divine names or angels or whatever, again, it is sort of this idea, you know, it's like you call on Michael for strength and protection. It's like it's fire. It's a, you know, a strength energy. So it's sort of trying to bring strength into you, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but and then if we look at say something like method acting,
Mhm.
that you know that's a whole process of invocation, really.
Yeah. Which I've always thought like it specifically think of like method acting or just people being different versions of themselves in different situations. I don't feel like I'm very good at being completely a different person in different contexts. Like I feel like I don't have like control over that necessarily, where it's like it's still gonna come. Not that that is the intention, but it's I don't actively think about it enough to try to like bring in other aspects. I mean, is I think just a part of me that's like, no, like you need to still feel comfortable in the way you're acting, if that makes sense. Like I don't necessarily feel comfortable or I question. I'm a big questioner of like what I'm doing. Like, am I just putting on an act? But it's like, am I always putting on an act?
So you know, again, I think that this can be related to the idea of the conscious invoking of entities or angels or demons or whatever, because it's, you know, like the Goetia and you know the keys of Solomon and all that. Those angels are well, and really all angels um, demons or whatever have some place in our psyche.
Yeah.
So that's that because that's really what's happening is like we're taking on different traits. It's because the process of conscious invocation is when you're unlocking those things on purpose.
Hmm.
You know, or like saying that you want to bring more of this into you. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? But those traits of, those spirits or what have you, all do lie within you. And again, that comes down to the sort of group consciousness, even, and everything sort of being a part of everything.
Yeah.
Um,
No, because I remember specifically, your, and this was probably a while ago, but your conscious like invocation of the four of um Raphael, Michael, Gabriel, and Uriel, and like your perspective
Flowers,
on,
Metatron, and Sandalphon.
yeah, and your like the effect it had. And
So go
yeah,
ahead.
no, I was gonna say, and I never actually attempted to do that, but
The invocations?
I did him, but like all together. Like I was never
Oh, you
conscious.
never like channel one specific.
I did have I did. Now that you say that, I remember that I did for a week. I think it was just Raphael, and it was like shit was going wild. And you were like, "Oh, I just meant to do it for a day or something like that." And I was like, "Oh, it's probably like I don't know. I guess I'm not always conscious of like what is affecting me."
Well, I think a lot of people aren't, you know. I mean, and that's sort of the point of those kinds of rituals
Yeah.
is to sort of gain control of or to start to repair and understand, the subtle body or whatever.
Yeah.
Meaning, like the aura or light body or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Um, and so with my process with invocation in general has been life changing in a lot of ways. I've started doing ritual again regularly just because it just makes, well, I don't know. I took a step back from it because I was just so burnt out and stressed and I didn't feel like I had any time to do it. And, you know, I don't know. I've been doing it regularly again though, and it's been good. But my whole experience with it, I can't describe it any other way than it opening up my perspective to a whole different way of seeing things. But even beyond that, it's I feel better physically, I feel better mentally, I feel more clear, I feel more clear, I feel more sharp. Um, it's like it enhances everything. It's sort of like half of me has been asleep my whole life, and then it's just like comes on,
Yeah.
you know.
Which,
And so, well, what I was going to say about the um, archangels thing, when we're talking about, say, Raphael, Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, and so on, well, those elements they're elemental, so they represent different seasons and different elements, and um, and so, for example, Raphael is very much of air and spring and of the mind and of intelligence. So but the idea of invoking them all at once, it's sort of like you're bringing in a perfect balance of those elements. But when you focus on one, if you're doing Raphael, were probably very much thinking a lot. You know what I mean? Just very
which
much
is
in your
not the
head.
thing that I necessarily need to invoke.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you already have a lot of that,
Like
even,
I think too much, so
So,
it's like it was overload.
but yeah, I think that's, especially starting off, or even trying to make progress in, bringing in more invocations and whatever your intention is. I think that it's very beneficial to do multiple at the same time. I
Yeah.
think my main focus for wanting to do one at a time was just to sort of take note of the effects had.
Hmm.
Um, And because they'll teach you different things, you'll get inclinations or you'll be inspired to do certain things that maybe you've never even thought of before. So really it's like you can expand your way of thinking and the way you are in the world by a lot just by spending a time focusing on a certain energy.
Yeah. And I feel like that was always like, I felt and still am like a bit impatient in what it, like I wouldn't do that because I'm like, oh, I don't have all this time to spend on this. Like, but in reality, it's like, what else am I doing? Like, no, that's important to like pause, take time to really test things out. Which is just a thing for myself. But I do think, especially because your invocations and your experience of it was like very interesting to me, of like the ways that you are consciously channeling or invoking a certain energy, and it does affect you in ways that like you wouldn't expect, which maybe I should actually try because I have not done ritual in the classic sense in a long time.
Yeah.
I've done like I'm doing other explorations, but
I think it's good to switch up. I think it's good to explore everything because everything has its validity, you know?
right.
In a lot of ways, it's just different processes of getting to the same thing. But there is something about that, you know, hermetic golden dawn magic that just does it for me.
Yeah.
But also, I'll spend a lot of time just like doing regular meditation stuff, which for a long time that's what I was doing. Because like I said, I haven't done, you know, ritual in a good while. And that's the thing also is with the impatience. I've experienced that too. And that's, you know, when you're just when it becomes hard to be present with ritual or anything like that. And so there's a couple of perspectives on that. It's, you know, there's the option of taking a step back, and I don't, you know, neither is really wrong, but there's the option of taking a step back and then just coming back to it because it is, you know, spiritual practice is a lifelong pursuit, is the way that I've come to see it now.
Yeah.
But you know, also I will say if I feel like it also depends on where you started in the first place, like integrity wise, because you know, in theory, if one starts the whole process very slow, focused, and just doing everything they can to focus on what they're doing, the effects would probably be so significant that you wouldn't really have that impatience so much at a later time. It's like a monk, you condition yourself to it, you
Yeah.
know? But I think with us, our problem is that we have different things going on in the world and we get wrapped up with everyday life. It's like, I want to go eat breakfast, you know, or whatever.
Yeah.
But, and, you know, I think that and it's interesting to see how it develops. But I think that, you know, so that brings me to the other option is you just work through it because, you know, maybe you'll be in a hurry or feeling, you know, not very present with the ritual, but I would just still do it anyway.
Right.
Um, you know, when I was doing it intensely because it's just like you just it's a discipline, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but And then when I took a step back, I really took a step back because it was just like it was hard to get motivated to get going again. And I really want to because when I was doing invocations before, I was mostly um just like accumulating angels basically. I would do a pentagram ritual and then I would just build the angels around me for invocation. But I want to start exploring more um because I know a lot of the rituals, like the hexagram rituals, pentagram rituals, the rose cross, middle pillar, but there's others beyond there, you know, because there's like the supreme ritual of the pentagram and supreme hexagram ritual and all these other ones that I want to start looking at the formulas for those. But also just, I think that it's supposed to sort of become an organic process that just channels through you. Because I mean, it becomes, it's around your work, right? And the thing is, when you do those rituals so many times, I mean, it would be good to revisit them periodically, but it kind of becomes a part of you because that's the idea is you're working it into your subtle body. It
Yeah.
becomes a functioning piece of you. Like even when I took a year off from doing ritual, I had been doing it so intensely for so long, like it changed the way I feel and operate forever. Like I will never be the same person before starting that, you
Yeah.
know?
Which I feel the same way. And I also feel like a sense of guilt in not, which is like, I don't know, something that I think is very, or I've heard people describe like even the emotion of guilt is very like part of I grew up as a Catholic and like I think Catholicism is like very guilt. I don't know. I haven't looked into this much, but I've just heard people say that like guilt is kind of thrown in to that religion a lot, but I use the same area for like my other type of exploration and like I feel some sense of guilt that like I'm not acknowledging like the other aspects that got me to like the exploration that I'm at now. But
Well, it's not, you're like so guilty for not doing the ritual formulas along with everything else.
right.
Yeah, I mean, don't. I can see that. Like, and that's because you want to be disciplined with it. You want to be because you should want to,
Right.
right? But that's the thing is it may take you in a whole other direction. You may come back to it. You may struggle with it, but and the thing to keep in mind is that it's not like it's a living creature that you're just neglecting. You know what I mean? But as far as like your own development, feeling guilty even, it's
Right.
just like because I used to feel that way, but I don't think that that's it because also understanding the things that I came to understand through those rituals, I'm able to apply. The way I do everything is different now. Like
Mhm.
I might just go to the pool and I'll like sit in the pool and picture the stream of light connect to my crown and I'll just sit there and vibrate names and fill myself with light and vibrate, you know what I'm saying? So it changed the way I just move through life. If I'm afraid, I'll invoke power consciously in my mind's eye. If you know what I'm saying? It's just like it becomes an operating part of you. So, at some point or another, you're probably not going to be doing the lesser banishing ritual of pentagram every single day or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And a lot of times I feel like people, what I've heard is after several years of doing it, and you really sort of digested the lessons of it, so to speak, you would start doing it seasonally,
Interesting. Like
like
only
at
in the
solstice
fall,
and things like that,
would you say?
like at solstice and things like that.
Okay. Because I was even thinking tonight, I was like, should I do the less like LBRP right now? And I like decided against it because I was like, I don't necessarily not because it was extremely powerful for me when I did it every day or twice a day in getting me to a certain point of recognizing certain aspects of my life. But I thought about it and I was like, I'm not going to do it because like actively I don't necessarily want to like rid myself of the other elements that are part
At
of
play.
yeah. In like right before talking to you. Like I wanted like my perspective and what I had been thinking of wanting to talk to you about and like to be more present with that. And I felt I wanted kind of everything that has been around me to be part of the conversation, which I do think that LBRP for me was really ridding myself of like any aspect of the energies affecting me, which I needed for sure in the moment and in the time, like the
That's
money.
the thing, is that it'll just clear everything.
Right.
So what I would say to that, because I don't, for one, I don't do the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram unless I feel like I need to. Like I'll do it intuitively because for the same reason, there's some energies you want to keep around. What I do on a more regular basis is the invocation of a pentagram. So
Mhm.
I basically just, especially where I did it like just for so long. And that doesn't mean that you retire from it, but again, it's just like I don't feel the need to do it every day at this point in my life. So it's, the invocation pentagram has sort of become one of my daily practices though, just to call in the energy that I want. But sometimes, things will feel mucked up and I'll just want to blast everything and like it's very
Yeah.
refreshing. But
I definitely
also,
feel a sense of wanting to do it more, but just not kind of before this conversation.
well, and certain energies that you wanted to keep around, right? One thing that's just coming to mind right now, and you could say this is channeled because I've never thought of this idea before. But you know how you would cover up your altar in black or like put certain items away in black that you would want to keep the energy on? You could actually take, say, items and give them a symbol for what you want to stay. Like, say you have a particular spirit around you or something, you want that to stay, and then you wrap that in black and state your intention with it. I don't
Right.
see why that wouldn't work as long as you were fully invested in the idea.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea actually. Because, yeah, that was something that I also like took in like where I do all my spiritual practice. It's like there are elements that like I would want to like be long standing and like part of it that I don't want to necessarily like banish.
Well, and the thing is, again, it's like it all comes down to your work in this world, whatever that may be for you.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that, however it develops with me or you or anyone, it is very unique to you because I mean, like you did self-initiation.
Yeah.
You've initiated yourself into the pursuit of magic. And that's why it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like you're on that, whether we're consciously aware of it all the time, right? Because you can't just unknow things,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
Um, and that's why it's very important to be conscious, not just of say, like say you never did, Golden Dawn rituals again. Um, you're still in that pursuit of, spiritual development or whatever, because I mean, again, even if you look at all the religions through the world, there's like correlations of the same stories and everything. We're all getting to the same place. It's just a matter of choosing your aesthetic in a lot of ways.
Yeah. No. And I don't know if this necessarily relates, but I am kind of curious to like hear your perspective. But like before I started doing this, I I don't necessarily recognize it anymore, but my perspective before I started was like, oh, I was very conscious of like, is this bad? Like of like outside perspectives of like if someone knew I was doing this, or do they think that I'm like doing something evil? Like I remember like right before I was like, wait, what am I doing right now? Like, what is this? And I think that's
Especially
like,
when it dawned on you how real it is.
but like I was not, it's like not even that. It didn't even dawn on me that it was real. It was just more so like the superficial perspective of it, of like, oh, like at the time I was living with my parents, and I was like, if my dad heard me doing this, like he would probably like start like saying I needed to be exercised or something. Like I was taking just popular thought and
And
being like, is
apply.
this what it is? Like,
I feel like that's what a lot of people think it is,
and now
and
I
then
don't see that anymore. Like, I'm like, is that what people are thinking? But I don't, I don't know.
I still have a hard time with that. That I don't talk about it really though, but outside of my whole fucking social media presence being that, so in a lot of ways I get self-conscious about that. Not so much on TikTok because nobody knew that I even had a TikTok that like I know. You know what I'm saying? So that was sort of like my own little world where I just was able, like I didn't care. But when I started posting on Instagram, people I know on there who follow me and stuff. And then but at a certain point I stopped caring. But I do, especially when it's sort of like brought up or people ask me about it, you know, I do have a tendency to sort of not want to share a lot for that reason. Or just, I mean, it's not really meant to be talked about much anyway, but as far as people's perception, I mean, I think that the idea of it's a lot more accepted now, really, than it ever has been. Like even in the 90s, early 2000s, you know, like growing up, because like I've always been into this stuff, and I got all the hate as far because like growing up in the South and like in a Christian area, people would tell my mom that I was going to hell. But a lot has evolved. You don't really see that so much anymore. It's pretty um but again, depending on who you talk to, because there are
Yeah.
definitely still communities that think that way. Most people probably just think it's silly, to be honest, which
Yeah.
is what I find most embarrassing. Is like I just don't want people to think that I'm like silly or like
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Because people don't get it, and but
Yeah.
that's also the thing is like working past those, because that's part of what you're stripping away with doing this is like worrying about what they think.
Right. No, because it's even like my friends that still or do have like they'll go to church and they have like strong religious beliefs. Like I don't know, like it only comes out like they only mention it sometimes. And I think it's even in a traditional sense, like they find to not want to talk about it because people find it in general like I don't want to say like devotion to something, but
Being
the
spiritual or religious in general.
right is silly to everyone. Which I mean, I'm I'm not like that's where I came from, kind of. Like I don't know if I was necessarily conscious of it and I just didn't want to go to church, but like growing up, I was like, no, like I don't believe in anything. Like this is bullshit.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily know how I got to here, but I definitely I think in general though, people do have a connection to something higher. And for me personally, like exploring any type of route to like understanding that better is what I find valuable to focus on or to try.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I think that that's a big part of the process, honestly, is trying different things and see what resonates. And, I think that the perspective on spirituality being silly, it has a lot to do with social media and pop culture. I feel like, because you get whatever. Um, but, also I think that people don't really take enough time to think about it and what that means. They just think like, um, whatever like vague information they have about it.
Right.
Be it like, if you're like a weird Jesus person or oh, this person thinks they can do magic or
Yeah.
whatever. It's just people don't really because if you really get into the depth of it, it all makes perfect sense. And I mean, honestly, science is coming to deny it less and less anyway. So they're going to have to, because it just is.
Yeah. You mentioned science and I think I don't know like how traditional it is or like the path of science, but like it was always opposed to religion and like I think it's
That's
just
what people say, or at least most people.
well,
I mean, I
I
feel
do
like
think it's because it's like a diametric opposition of like how life is formed. I think that's like why it
it
was
depends
so
on how you look at it, though.
right.
If we're talking about like, taking Adam and Eve, literally and not as an allegory, I could
Yeah,
see how it, affects the perspective of science, but
right.
it depends on the teachings you're looking at because, that's the thing is like a lot of people just take those stories as either literal or they assume that people take them literal or
Mhm.
that there is no deeper perspective on it. And it's because they haven't taken time to look.
Right. And I even want to and I've read certain like passages of the Bible, but I do want to like just read it straight. I don't think I've ever I know I've never read it
Read the Bible straight through.
straight through, which
That is
it's
a task.
I know, but it's like what? Like I'll read something else. But because I do think like I'm a novice enough in like biblical teaching. Like I don't remember anything I learned really growing up in like I had to go every Sunday and like learn about it, but I don't really remember what I learned. And I think I just remember like the passages I do read, I'm like, this is what someone took from this. Like that's not my understanding of what I just read.
Yeah, well, and that's another thing is like all these other interpretations of it. I surprisingly retained a lot of biblical information. Like whenever like I just seem like I'll just pull stuff out without really thinking about it, and I don't know why that is.
Mm.
Because I have not taken a whole lot of time to like. I mean, I guess I have like here and there, but I feel like I know more about the Bible than I actually even should. Which is kind of interesting to think about in itself if we want to get like ooh about it or whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think because I went to church when I was a kid with my babysitter, so a lot of it may have just like really locked in there or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't
I
know.
wasn't paying attention.
I don't think I was either. I think I was pissed that I had to be there a lot of the time.
Yeah, I was too, and I've always been like a prove it to me type of person, which
Yeah.
which I think is interesting now, like looking at like the practices I've done. Like I don't know if like my older self would have thought like what is going on is proving it to myself, but like it is now type of
Yeah,
thing.
I was gonna say, well, the nature of what you're dealing with is so, I don't know, ethereal. I don't, it's sort of hard to grasp because in a lot of ways, I would say it definitely, like if you go do those rituals every day, it'll definitely prove itself. But then it's also so it could be easy, especially after a while of doing these things and sort of operating this way before you really get a grasp on it. Because that's the thing is there's that period, that in between time of like figuring it out, and you can very much feel like you're going crazy. But at a certain point, there's a breakthrough where you sort of start to understand it and you're able to work with it a bit more fluidly and a bit more calm. And when it kind of becomes normal and you just sort of understand, how energy and the laws of nature and everything just sort of move, it's really kind of, I feel like learning to move with it. It's at first it's explosive because it's just like unlocking this, you know, the what's the Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark when they open it up and all this like terrible
Yeah.
stuff comes out. It's but that sort of you break down something to build it back up.
Yeah,
It's because it's such a shock to the system. I
right.
feel like.
No, for sure. And it's like for me, even now, I recognize like the time in my life when I started doing it, like everything was changing.
Yeah.
But
That's the thing too, is it comes together like a perfect storm. So you're not sure,
Right.
it's like it's almost like just becoming more aware of what happens,
Right.
even.
And I'm like, was it just like, I mean, my one perspective is that was just something I was doing at the time when everything else in my life that like wasn't supposed to be there was I was coming to realize it. But that would be not recognizing like the full scope of it. Whereas like I feel like that did come to me at the time when that was also ready to be recognized.
Well, and I feel like it's not even necessarily that it came to you, because a lot of people think about transformation or manifestation or like things coming to fruition. They think about it as something that's sort of being dropped in their lap, when in actuality you set forth into motion a series of events to create it, because
Right.
that's what the whole channel is. The tree of life, it works its way down to, Malkuth, or back up,
Yeah.
right? So I feel like, again, when you start tuning the subtle body, and with that inherently comes more awareness, and and the more you dive into it and you read the books and you do the work and all and the books aren't even really important. You could, if you did ritual regularly, like, you could not read a book ever, and I think that you would understand everything just clearly. um I don't know what that is, but there's certain, doors that unlock, and you just start thinking differently, and then, and like, understanding, if I, because you don't even, to make change happen, you don't even need ritual. Like, you can literally just center a thought, and I swear to God, you can see results in just like a few days, or at least the starting of that process. Like, you can see where a process starts.
Yeah.
If you pay attention to patterns from, where the thought began.
Yeah. Which I think that that's just like a testament to your intention and your will on something,
Hmm.
like to really focus in on it. Whereas, like, I don't think I necessarily was the type of person or am the type of person to be able to focus in such a way where it's like having something around me or some type of practice to like help me realize that is what I needed.
Well, yeah, well, that's what you set your will to do.
Right.
Because you focused on the ritual, which the purpose of the ritual is to bring you to awareness, and heighten the subtle body and everything else, right? So that was your will. Your will was to see things in a bigger way, or to whatever you were trying to experience.
Right. And to like to do,
And
which
to do, you had to do.
right, because I'm a person where it's like, well, like let me read this whole book or like let me like really try to analyze the shit out of this until I then forget to put it into practice. Like that is my big thing that I think is my fault of like, oh, I'll just intellectualize this till it's dead.
It's like an armchair occultist. You ever heard
Yes.
that?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Where I think especially like what I was doing every day. It was like, no, you can't, like, you got to do it every day. So do it. Like, I can't be thinking about it so much. It's like you only have so much time in the day. So get it done now.
Well, and that's how you would look at anything. I'm sure you said the same thing at your job.
Well, that's why I like have to get things done because I don't have all that
Yeah.
time. I would
Well,
love
well,
to
no,
think about it for a
exactly.
while.
Like, it's just a matter of, like, if you're serious about doing it,
Right.
because that's the thing, is like, you would not spend the amount of time it takes to do all that if you weren't looking for something with it.
Yeah, which I do think like I mean with my job being a lawyer like the thing I like the most is not being a lawyer. Like I liked learning about it. Like
Well,
I
and that says a lot too.
yeah, like I more so which I think actually happens with a lot of lawyers or a lot of people that go to law school, is like the conceptual aspect of it was like what was most interesting to me. But I've always, not when I was young, like I hated school, but it wasn't until there were things that I was interested in that I like was like, oh, this is actually interesting, that I then like to learn about it, which I
Well,
don't
and
think.
I think that's common. I mean, like, especially if we're talking about magic, because I mean, that's what draws people in is like the idea of it. And then like the lore has its own, it's fun to study.
Yeah, which, yeah. And it's, I mean, that's what drew me in. It continues to draw me in, like learning new aspects of it. But to get back to other questions I wanted to ask you was
Okay.
more so on your role as like a channel or a medium. I'm interested to like hear how or the experience of like different modes that you may or may not have to be in, like compared to like if you're doing a reading for me, like a tarot reading for me, like if you have to, if there's like an approach you take to it, or if there's like a different energy that's involved versus say you were doing a scrying for me, or you were doing a mediumship reading for me, or if you were just doing like a collective tarot reading. Like I'm interested how that kind of comes out through you.
So I would definitely say that they are like different modes. So for example,